Good morning. This is the news for Friday, February 6th, 2026. We are following a critical story out of the Middle East, where the next 24 hours could be decisive in the standoff between the United States and Iran. High-stakes diplomacy is underway, but it's happening against a backdrop of intense military pressure and a looming deadline for action.
The gravity of the situation was really put into stark relief by President Trump himself. When a reporter asked if Iran's supreme leader should be worried, his answer was direct and chilling. That comment has set an incredibly tense tone for the delicate negotiations now taking place.
The focus of the world right now is on what's being called the Muscat Convergence. These are talks that, frankly, almost didn't happen. They were on the absolute brink of collapse, only to be pulled back at the very last minute and moved to a new, neutral city.
So, as we report this on Friday, February 6th, officials from both the United States and Iran are meeting in Muscat, Oman. This is being viewed by almost everyone as the last real chance to de-escalate what has become a rapidly worsening crisis over Iran's nuclear program.
And you can get a sense of just how fragile this whole thing is by looking at the last 48 hours. Just 2 days ago, these talks were completely off, canceled. The two sides couldn't even agree on the format in Istanbul. It was only after what sources are calling high-level messages from key allies in the region that the U.S. agreed to get back to the table, leading to this scramble to meet in Oman.
So, what's making this so difficult? Well, let's look at the core diplomatic hurdles. The reality is, both sides are walking into that room in Muscat with completely different goals. And you can see the fundamental disagreement right here. The U.S. wants to talk about everything. Not just the nuclear program, but also Iran's ballistic missiles and its support for groups across the region. Iran, on the other hand, is saying, no way. They will only discuss the nuclear program, period. They also want to talk one-on-one with the U.S., and they're rejecting any effort to bring other countries into the conversation.
And just to be crystal clear on those terms, bilateral means it's just the U.S. and Iran in the room, nobody else. Multilateral is what the U.S. wants, which would bring in other nations, especially those in the region. The fact that they can't even agree on who should be at the table tells you just how far apart they are.
With these deep divisions, it's really no surprise that the official word out of Washington is extremely cautious. Sources we've spoken to say that U.S. officials are very skeptical that any meaningful progress can actually be made here.
But the disagreements aren't even the most urgent part of the story. The reason these talks are so critical, so high stakes, is because there appears to be a very hard deadline. And that brings us to what's being called the Sunday Ultimatum.
This, of course, raises the one question that everyone is asking. What happens if these talks in Muscat completely fall apart?
And this is the crucial detail. We're seeing multiple intelligence reports that suggest the White House has set a deadline of this Sunday, February 8th, for a diplomatic breakthrough. The implication is clear. If diplomacy fails by then, military options are very much on the table.
And we need to be clear, this is not just talk. This threat is being backed up by some very real military movements. The U.S. has already positioned aircraft carriers and other strike assets throughout the Middle East. At the same time, new satellite photos show that Iran is busy with new construction at its nuclear sites. In response, the Pentagon is moving to reinforce air defenses for its own troops and its allies in the region.
Now, the outcome here isn't going to be limited to the Middle East. The sheer uncertainty of the situation is already creating significant ripple effects around the entire globe, hitting everything from financial markets to international alliances.
I mean, you can literally see the anxiety in the markets. Just this week, as these tensions have ratcheted up, major indexes like the S&P 500 and the Dow are down noticeably, and more volatile assets like Bitcoin have taken an even bigger hit.
And the concern goes well beyond just a bad week for the stock market. S&P Global Ratings has issued a formal warning that a major military conflict could threaten the stability of the entire banking system across South and Southeast Asia. If you're finding this coverage useful, please take a moment to like this report and subscribe for continuing updates.
All of this is happening inside a complex web of international pressure. You have many of America's allies in the region and in Europe pushing hard for a diplomatic solution and urging both sides to show restraint. At the same time, other key partners, like Israel, are reportedly pushing Washington to take an even harder line against Iran.
So, to summarize the situation as it stands, diplomats are in Muscat for what appears to be a final, desperate attempt to find common ground. All the while, the clock is ticking towards a Sunday deadline, a deadline that is backed by credible military force. The situation remains extremely fluid. We will continue to monitor all developments and will provide another update in 24 hours.